One of the things that I've learned about looking after me, about my self-care, is that I had to learn how to establish boundaries. And they didn't come by easily. In fact, it wasn't clear at all how it came about, but I do know that it was about my needs. It began with me meeting my needs. Well, I've learned that boundary challenges in our homeschool can interfere with our energy for our homeschool, because otherwise our heads are just somewhere else. They're not with our kids. They're not in our day. They're not present. And so I've learned these things about my homeschool and how I show up in my homeschool. I have had boundary challenges with getting separate space or building margins in my day so that I can have quiet space or separate space. Certainly about handling interruptions, whether that's interruptions with family members and whether I answer the phone or whether I receive a text, or of course, even my kids. If I'm trying to have that 15 minutes of separate space, which I did for many years, sitting on the corner chair, watching, I was probably tapping on Pinterest, trying to plan out the rest of my homeschool day. But for me, I needed that margin of separate or quiet space. I know handling interruptions was an issue. Sometimes cleanliness is the thing. And when I talk about boundaries with cleanliness, I don't mean that you're going to have a perfectly clean home, because if you listen to my Marie Kondo Your Homeschool podcast this week, you're going to know that I don't think you can. I think we have to surrender to not having that perfectly clean home, just our homeschool realities. But we can build boundaries around it. I think we can build boundaries around things like, are we answering the phone? Are we answering the door? I think we have to come up with a plan for all the random questions that people have for us. We have to decide how we're going to address them. I think we also have to have a plan to address the unsupportive family members that we have, and not reactive defensive stuff, because that would speak that we don't have clear boundaries. If we are responsive, if we actually are coming from a heart of trying to understand somebody, but also recognizing we don't have to explain to anybody, that is the really point of reference that we want to come from with every element or every relationship we have in our life. So responsive and listening, but also having a plan to address random questions, whether they're from family or from somebody at the grocery store. So what about having boundaries with our kids in how they speak to us or how we speak to them? Both of those. Or, and I think this is the most important part, how we speak to ourselves. Because how we engage ourselves, it's an internal boundary discussion, I'm told, versus the external boundary concept that a lot of people think when I speak about boundaries, or when someone says the word boundaries, they usually think that means, how do I make sure that somebody else treats me in a respectful way or something like that. But sometimes we have to address, what are the internal boundary challenges that we have? How are we speaking to ourselves? How do we view ourselves? Not talking to ourselves unkindly, learning self-compassion, having mindful moments to understand who we are, how we experience the world, how we experience relationships, and actually speaking kindly. And of course, I think that boundary discussions usually relate to, are we meeting our needs? Because when we meet our own needs and we get clear on who we are, we get really clear on where we end and where someone else starts, and how to actually incorporate boundary discussions with other people. It just gets a whole lot clearer. Next Thursday, I'm going to have a chat with Mickey from Homeschooling the Boys, Homeschooling with the Boys, and she's a homeschool coach, and we're going to talk about screen time and how to build boundaries around screen time. I'm curious what you think is an important discussion around boundaries in the homeschool world. So put your comments in the comment section below, and if you want to join me, we're going to connect next Thursday at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We'll talk to you soon.